All right, this is why we always have to read the question before we get into it. Well, this is a more specific question than usual. It can most reasonably be inferred from the text that the finding about the microorganism community composition was important for which reason. So, okay, let's rephrase that, right? Why was the community composition important? Now, I don't think I would write this on my actual test or scrap paper, but I'm thinking in my head, right? One of the challenges with the SAT is the questions can sometimes be confusing. So we can rephrase them sometimes into just better versions of themselves. And so now I have a much clearer idea of what I'm looking for as I go through this passage. It's much easier to follow. So hopefully that helps you. I think it's a strategy I use. So why was the community composition important? So let's see if we can notice when they start talking about the community composition. To understand how temperature change affects microorganism-mediated cycling of soil nutrients in alpine ecosystems, Ava whatever collected plant soil cores in the Tatra Mountains at elevations around 2,100 meters and transplanted them to elevations of 1,700 to 1,800 meters, where the mean air temperature was warmer by 2 degrees Celsius. Oh, a lot of hard things in there. But I don't think they talked about the community, right? I don't think so. There's microorganisms. I don't think they're talking about the community. Microorganism-mediated nutrient cycling was accelerated in the transplanted cores. Crucially, microorganism community composition was unchanged, allowing this person to attribute the acceleration to temperature-induced increases in microorganism activity. So why was it important? I guess because it was unchanged, right? It just says it. Let's see if there's an answer to that question that kind of, mimics that. Let's see. A, it provided preliminary evidence that microorganism-mediated nutrient cycling was accelerated in the transplanted cores. Doesn't sound like anything's unchanged there. I don't know. Let's keep going. B, it suggested that temperature-induced changes in microorganism activity may be occurring at increasingly high elevations. Again, it's not, I don't know, it doesn't say anything. C, it ruled out a potential alternative explanation for the acceleration in microorganism-mediated nutrient cycling. Again, it doesn't say it's unchanged. It clarified that microorganism activity levels in the plant soil cores varied depending on which microorganisms comprised the community. Well, that I guess we can get rid of, right? So depending on which microorganisms comprised the community, they were saying that it was unchanged. It was always the same organisms, right? Crucially, microorganism community composition was unchanged. So D is definitely out, but I don't know if we can get further than that just from that simple summary. So here's how dumb summaries work, right? We have a dumb summary. Let's smarten it up a little bit. Let's get a little deeper because now we're being forced to because it's a harder question. So let's go back to this part though. I do think this is the essential piece of the question here. Microorganism-mediated nutrient cycling was accelerated in the transplanted cores. So this is like a finding. Crucially, microorganism community composition was unchanged, allowing this person to attribute the acceleration to temperature-induced increases in microorganism activity. So I guess because it was unchanged, they could make a separate conclusion, right? Because the conclusion is about the activity of the microorganisms. So if they're not changing, then maybe now something that is changing we can measure more easily. This gets to my knowledge of science, and that is something we need to know pretty well for the SAT, is how a science experiment works. Basically, I think what we're talking about here is the idea of a control in an experiment, right? Something doesn't change, and that allows us to measure the things that do change and understand that those changes are relevant to whatever our hypothesis or experiment was. So let's look at A, B, and C again. It provided preliminary evidence that microorganism-mediated nutrient cycling was accelerated in the transplanted cores. Well, is it preliminary evidence? I mean, I don't think they're talking about like we get our first bit of evidence and then there's later evidence. So I don't love that. But also, it was accelerated, I guess. I do say that, but I don't think that that's what's important, right? That's that first part. That's the finding. And then the conclusion is, why did this happen? They were able to attribute this acceleration to the temperature, I guess. I don't understand the science at all. It could all be made up. I have no idea. So it's not that they showed that the communities showed that the thing was accelerating, it's that they were able then to use the unchanged communities to explain why it was accelerating. That's my takeaway. So I'm not going to cross it out, but I think that's why it's wrong. B, it suggested that temperature-induced changes in microorganism activity may be occurring at increasingly high elevations. Now that I understand the conclusion more, the elevation thing is not part of that last bit, right? That's earlier. This seems to be about different temperatures and different something else is going on. I don't think that increasingly high elevations, right? Even when they talk about elevations, they're moving, I guess, these cores or their collected plant soil cores around 2100 and then moving them to other elevations. So they're changing the elevations in the experiment. The elevations are not changing. Like, that's not what we're measuring. We are controlling the elevation. And so that's not like the result of the survey. So that one I'm much more confident getting rid of. C, it ruled out a potential alternative explanation for the acceleration in microorganism mediated nutrient cycling. Let's do to choice C what we did to the original question. Let's rephrase it as a better question. It ruled out a potential alternative explanation. What is the potential alternative explanation? Well, I guess if the composition had changed, that could have been the other explanation. But because it was unchanged, that allowed them to have this other explanation, right? The explanation of the temperature, right? So this is the answer. Basically, what this passage is saying in a very confusing way is they have a control. They controlled for the microorganism communities, and because that was unchanged, they were able to say, all right, any differences that we see in our experiment is attributable to something else, right? It's attributable, I guess, to the temperature-induced increases, whatever that means. So this is a very hard question. I think so, at least. But notice that we were able to kind of ignore large parts of the passage and really just focus on the part that mattered because we understood the question very well from the get-go. I was able to zero in on that one piece. It eliminated an answer. And then I could kind of go back to that piece, understand it a little bit more, get a smarter version of my dumb summary, and then get to the one answer. But it took time. It also took a knowledge of science, and so you should get comfortable with how science experiments work, because understanding the basic principles of a scientific experiment definitely helps me here understand that this was a control, or some aspect of this was controlling for something that allowed us to continue the experiment in other ways. I still don't understand the experiment, but I understand experiments generally, and I think that's the key. Don't worry about the specifics of the experiment in the passage. Understand how experiments work, and you should be able to figure it out based on this, the situation that you're given.